difficult time, and a lot of us are in pain, and a lot of us are really angry. I wanted to let you know that you're not alone, and many are sharing this feeling, and that in this moment, it's hard to concentrate, and it's hard to concentrate and be our most productive selves. But also in this moment, I've heard from many that work is creating a little bit of structure and a little bit of solace, and we very much care for it, which is why we will continue exploring topics related to marketing, and which is why we're excited to talk about incrementality with you today.
Well said. So, I mean, incrementality, it is a vital concept, but I feel like it's not very well understood in the marketplace, although luckily it's well understood by you, Alex. So we're going to get into some pretty practical stuff. And I just want to say at the top that everyone should feel free to submit their questions throughout, because we want to make this as interactive a session as possible. So to start, I don't think it's too basic to just put a working definition of incrementality out there. I mean, the way I understand it in its absolutely simplest form is that it's a way for advertisers to, I guess, just gauge the revenue lift they're getting from their advertising spend. And you can't do that if you don't know which conversions are a direct result, of your campaign, and which would have been, increment, which would have happened anyway. So is that a good framework to think about incrementality? Anything you would add to that?
I think you got it. Ultimately, this is about what would have happened anyway. And it's so very tempting to associate the results of our campaigns with what we did, but it's not always the case. Our business was functioning yesterday, even before we did this campaign that launched today. So if we see a jump, well, that's great, but would this have happened anyway? Is there something else that's going on? So being able to rigorously measure that and argue about this, not just in terms of what happened to your CAC, but what is happening to your LTVs, and take that reasoning and apply it not just in the product where it's very easy with A/B testing, not just in the lower funnel, but in the upper funnel where it's really hard.
So that's not just a definition, but sort of a passionate explanation for why this is particularly important. But why is it extra important for mobile marketers to really understand incrementality, measurement, and testing? I mean, partially I think because last click has just been the law of the land for so long. But I guess make the case for why mobile marketers should really be carving out the time and building the expertise around incrementality, because it's not easy. We'll get into how it's not easy, even though it's important.
Yeah, we get to spend the company's discretionary dollars. It's a big responsibility, and ultimately our success is determined by, did we drive growth when we spent these dollars? And this is a really big and really important job. For easily, I think this quote is 100 years old. Half of our marketing spend is wasted.
Wanamaker.
As true as it gets now.
So let's just get right into the how. I mean, it's clear why it's important, but how do you actually set up an incrementality test? How do you get started? What are the first three things that you have to do?
Yeah. Well, let's go into some really simple ones, and those that I bet you many in our audience have done themselves before. These truly are incrementality tests. An A/B test in the product where you say, okay, some portion of my audience are going to see a blue button, and some portion of our audience is going to see a green button. Let us measure what happens to conversion and what happens to our total sales. What you're measuring there is the incremental lift. One option is the baseline. One option is the incremental change. And you're trying to say, okay, when the button is green, 2.5% more people are clicking on it. Great, you know the impact of that. That is the simplest form of incrementality test, the simple product A/B test. Now, let's get a little bit more complicated. We as marketers get money involved, and the simplest form of money involved is coupons. Let's say you're running Gap.com, and you're thinking about, again, a product test, and some of your customers are going to see a $10 off jeans, and the other set of customers is not going to see $10 off jeans. That is yet another incrementality test, and also a simple one that I'm hopeful many in our audience have done themselves. They're able to say, okay, by virtue of introducing this coupon, what happens to my conversion, and what is the cost per incremental conversion. I'm sure that many have done this before, and it's frankly quite simple. That to me is the ground floor and the basics that absolutely everyone has to be doing today. Now let's take this a little bit further. In the Gap.com example, sure, you were able to sell some incremental jeans. Awesome. But for Gap, the value from a transaction is not just the immediate value. It's also new customers that come in and the long-term effect of those new customers. Maybe someone was visiting Gap.com, saw this coupon, redeemed it, and then in the future, in the next couple of months, they'll buy more stuff. Then the impact of that coupon is not just the immediate impact, it's the impact on the totality of the lifetime value of those customers. So in my mind, whenever you're doing this test, you're not just looking at incremental conversions, you're looking at incremental LTVs. And you're looking at the cost in an incremental way. And therein lies the foundational equation here that I think we all need to pursue and try to understand as deeply as we can. The idea that our incremental CAC should be equal, ideally, to the incremental LTV that we acquire. And you'll hear some resonance with the old microeconomic marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That is exactly the same thing, just applied in marketing. So that's just sort of some foundational concepts there and how you get started. It's not super complicated, but if we as marketers assume entrepreneur's role and assume that our job is not just to spend the money that we're given, but truly be the owners of the total business, and assume the role of someone who tries to optimize for the totality of the cash flows and revenue and customers' behavior in the next years, we get to do a better job.
So let's actually talk a little bit more about the signals that you look at. I mean, LTV is incredibly important. We have a question that just came in from Dave Weston. He's asking about some of the key metrics to track in the upper funnel. So, signals that you should, have in mind when, you're up there as opposed to, down here, which is what I think a lot of people really optimize toward and think about.
Yeah, most definitely. So upper funnel incrementality is super hard. Let me start with that. And vast majority of folks refuse to do this because it's that hard. And that's why a lot of the marketing spend is wasted, because it goes by intuition, or by a close second of the intuition, media consumption patterns, or by a close third, multi-touch attribution, which mostly is guessing and very, very wrong. My invitation is to organize really simple tests, really simple incrementality tests that allow you to judge the incremental effect of your media a little bit above the immediate transaction. Let me give you concrete examples of this. With Facebook and with Google, you're able to effectively take lists of your customers and say, okay, I'm going to hold out a portion of this customer base, and only the other side is going to get the treatment. Here are my churned customers. Here are people who ordered food delivery. Remember, I do food delivery for a living, so I obsess over it. Here are people who ordered food delivery in the past year, but not in the last 90 days. You can think of them as churned. Okay, I'm going to think about Facebook as means of reactivation. Okay, let me do a true incrementality test. I'm going to take the totality of that population. I'm going to do a holdout. Facebook is never going to see the people in the holdout, so there's no way for the vendor to cheat, quote unquote. And the other side is going to be exposed to the stimulus. And then after that, I'm going to look at the totality of the spend behavior. Not last click, forget about it. Not the clicks, but whatever happens downstream. Maybe they just scrolled through and they saw my ad on Facebook. And then after that, a day later, they were feeling hungry. They were like, hey, let me launch the app on my phone. No click has happened. And yet I want to give Facebook the benefit from that interaction. So I look at the totality of transactions from the treatment group against the totality of the transactions from the control group.
Well, so I want to ask another question from the audience because this is something I've thought about too. Because when you're setting up your incrementality test, if you want to be super pure about it, some people say, well, you have to create this playing field where everything else is turned off so you can understand true incrementality. So like other than pulling the plug on all of your marketing for a while and then looking campaign by campaign and vendor by vendor, how do you measure incrementality rather than ending up with correlation, like that classic example, right? Like raining, so I held an umbrella, but obviously there's a reason why you're holding that umbrella that has nothing to do with other factors.
No doubt. And first, allow me to reject the idea that even if you turned everything off, that measurement would actually be a good one. Mm-hmm. You'd never be doing that in real life. Even if you knew what a business like yours would get from Facebook if you turned everything off, well, Grubhub would never do that.
And it's not reality. It's not reality anyway.
Of course not, because Facebook cannot do the things that SEM can do. Facebook cannot do the things that TV can do. So if I knew the perfection of Facebook's impact in vacuum, that actually is completely unhelpful to my real situation. I want to know what the incremental impact is of additional Facebook spend over what I'm spending now, or what the impact of Facebook spend is compared to the zero that I could be spending.
Right.
So in that environment, I would actually just try to keep everything else constant, as opposed to turn everything to zero. Now, even if you try keeping things constant, macro effects, external effects can very much blow things up, just like what we've seen now. All of the tests in these past 3 months, I wouldn't consider them valid. I would consider them early indicators and something that you need to keep retesting. Or similarly, right? If weather during non-COVID times, if weather or some other external factors, political events, or maybe competitors' behavior drastically changed during the duration of your test, you got to throw out the results because it might have not been the stimulus that caused it.
So that's a very good point. Well, I want to get into the trenches though, like into the Grubhub trenches, because you've run incrementality tests, you've learned things, you've experienced problems, pitfalls. So maybe just it's story time. Tell us a few stories. Like take us through some of the experiences you've had in setting up real tests, and explain a little bit about what you've learned and certain things to keep in mind so that you avoid making common mistakes.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story of how we tried to discover the impact of our awareness media, as I think that's something that others care about as well. We're an online food delivery brand, and about 3 years ago, we desperately tried to understand which of our awareness dollars are actually working. And at that time, our thesis was as following: people who order food delivery online are early adopters of technology. Makes sense. Someone who's about to order something from a restaurant nearby, of course, is an Amazon Prime subscriber. Of course, they're watching digital video. Of course, they're a cable cutter. They watch Hulu and Netflix and YouTube. And of course, they don't watch regular TV and they hate commercials. I think this intuition makes perfect sense to this day. And this is how our investment thesis has gone for quite a while. And then we developed a mechanism to be able to truly judge whether that's the case or not, and run incrementality studies on our awareness spend. It's very similar to the framework that I just described, where we basically said, let me take a couple of markets, let's say Seattle and Portland, those that are as close as it gets in their demographics, in their weather. It's super important for food delivery. And let me try bombarding one of them with a stimulus and not touching the other one, and observing what happens. We call this approach sister market tests. Others refer to it as geo experiments. And what we discovered throughout that series of tests is that our intuition was very wrong. And that it is far more efficient to be investing dollars into awareness and growth in the boring old stodgy cable television that, oh my God, nobody watches.
Well,
than it
somebody
is.
watches it.
Somebody watches it, and it works out to be extremely efficient. This was counterintuitive, and something that we would have never predicted, and yet it turned out to be true. And from spending zero in television, we became a top 200 spender in the US on television, advertising an online first product.
So is there a place for your gut? I mean, is the gut a good thing, in terms of coming up with hypotheses to test? Like where, you always hear about art and science. I mean, the art of user acquisition is science, but where does the gut come into this?
In my mind, there is no way for the science to invent anything new. The gut and the intuition is how you come up with the ideas that you afterwards use science to measure. But if you keep trying to incrementally improve your product by these tiny little improvements that science suggests, you will be stuck in the local maximum. You will never find a way to passionately connect with your customers and break through, right? Just the discovery that TV is a good way to create awareness does not create a campaign that can break through. And there's no way science can come up with a TV campaign with "I Want It All" song from Queen in the background. That comes from creatives who are just super intuitive, brilliant. And that combination actually can work much better.
Well, and you could also spend a lot of money, finding out that something is 0.001%, better than something else, and then it doesn't really back out.
Totally.
So we have a question from Pedro in the chat. He's asking if you have any preference in terms of the methodologies that are available out there. There's, ghost bidding and, PSAs and intent to treat Facebook style testing. Do you have methodologies that you prefer? Maybe it's different depending on what you're trying to achieve.
For me, the foundation is about going back to first principles. Being able to say, here is my exposed group and here is my control group. And for every channel, it's different. You heard me describe a very, very simple approach for judging incrementality for TV and awareness media that makes no use of any technology at all and simply bombards a city with a specific stimulus and then looks at the totality of the impact on orders and new customers, right? There's no tech involved. There's no tech stack. So my invitation for you is to not be obsessed with the specific tools, but instead go back and say, how can, through the tools that I have, truly split the audience and look at the totality of the effect?
And what about partners? I mean, is this the sort of thing that you do in-house, or do you work with a DSP? Do you educate people you already have on staff to do these kinds of tests in a smart way? How do you do that?
We last year spent more than $250 million on marketing, also known as we have really got to be confident that our dollars are working. So for that reason, we've in-housed almost all of our marketing execution, and being able to say which approaches are working, to me, is a core competency that you just can't outsource because incentives get misaligned. That is, your Facebook agency will never tell you that Facebook isn't working because this is how they pay their bills.
But of course. So how do you hire the right people, or what skill sets do you need to make sure that your existing team has to do this right?
This to me is a broad thing. You got to hire for velocity of learning, people who actually genuinely want to learn. And of course, you need the statistical backing and folks who are able to dig into the data and truly understand how to set up an A/B test and be the advisors for the channel owners. So it's a combination of the two, the mindset across the board and a group of quants effectively that can support the experimentation.
And would you suggest ever using Facebook and Google's incrementality products? I know they have them, but then again, you're dealing with the walled gardens and you have to play by their rules. Like, what would you suggest on that front?
Sure. I would use them, but by no means would I use them as the only way to judge the efficacy of the channels. That is, you heard me explain in the Facebook route, in the Facebook test a little bit earlier, a mechanism that allows you to judge incrementality without using any Facebook tools at all. I'm a big believer that you've got to be the one on the lookout for the efficacy of your spend. Because the job of all of these vendors, they're not nefarious at all, but the job of all of these vendors is to convince you that whatever you're spending is working super well. So they're going to show you 20 charts, and one of them for sure is going to be going up and to the right.
I mean, that's an issue all over the place. Either misaligned incentives, or you just see things from your perspective. Hammers and nails sort of thing. So let's look into the future a little bit. Maybe you can make some predictions for me in our last few minutes. Like where is measurement going? What are some interesting tactics or tools that you're seeing, crop up? Self-service incrementality testing, for example, like automating that process. Is that going to become a bigger thing? Read the tea leaves.
Sure, let me try. I am finding that the majority of marketers today are brand marketers. There are now folks in that group that are beginning to open up to the idea that feedback loops and data can make them better. And I very much welcome that. And I think that trend is going to continue. So the split between performance marketing, terrible name, and brand marketing, also terrible name, is going to disappear, because the marketing groups are going to now see that the job of everyone is to drive growth. And if our brand investments aren't doing it, well, clearly we shouldn't be spending the money there. And if our growth investments are about a 0.01% optimization, heck, we got to put in a little bit of heart into it and a little intuition into it. So that's piece one. Piece two, I see a lot of homegrown platforms for judging incrementality, for judging A/B tests. We've had one at eBay. We have one at Grubhub. I am fully expecting that there will be technology solutions that allow smaller companies to take advantage of these same mechanisms without needing to build a bunch of tech. This will be a welcome addition, and as long as these vendors are independent from publishers that really benefit from the results of this measurement, I think this has a good shot.
So obviously we covered everything that needs to be known about incrementality in less than 25 minutes, but we have a question from Natalie, who's just asking for more information, like books to read to learn about relevant methodologies, any like particular blogs, things that you use to educate yourself and stay boned up.
Thanks for asking. I put a lot of test results from my own experiences onto my blog, alexweinstein.net. I've been working on compiling a resource set. I will actually publish it fairly soon. My invitation for you is to talk to both people outside of your company and ask them how do they know, because in most cases folks won't know, but you will sometimes find something interesting. That's advice one. And advice two, talk to people in finance, the natural enemies of the marketers, because they will have really interesting answers for you.
Alex, this was super fun. Thank you very much.
Allison, and thank you.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, Alex and Allison. We really appreciate your participation. Looking forward